Welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. I'm Reverend Wakil David Matthews.
And I'm the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. In this podcast, we share people's experiences with death and dying, grief and loss, and the end of life.
Every episode, we are so honored and blessed to share stories with amazing, compassionate, and wise guests. So let's get started. So thank you all for being here with us today. We're so honored to welcome our guest today, Yanna Hanson. Hello, Yana.
Yes, welcome, Yana.
Thank you.
Yanna Hanson is a death doula and currently specializes as a volunteer with End of Life Washington, helping terminal patients navigate the medical aid and dying process. She is often present when they take the life-ending medications. Yana also helps educate patients about another life-ending choice, that of VSED, which is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. After raising her own 5 children, Yana became an RN, providing post-op care for pediatric patients, but she often felt called to hospice nursing. When she retired, she became a hospice volunteer. 4 years ago, she completed a death doula training with Bodhi Be, and since then has been supporting patients through her association with the End of Life Washington.
Again, thanks so much for joining us on this conversation. We're so glad to have a chance to talk to you. And
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
yeah, thank you. We usually start with a question, just for kind of to set the tone and give everybody a chance to get started. So when did you first become aware of death?
Well, I when I was growing up, death was not something my family talked about. I had a grandmother who died when I was in elementary school. We didn't talk about that. We went out for Chinese food that night that she died. She didn't live, but that was what we did. We went out for Chinese dinner and nobody talked about it. And then I had a little nephew who died and we didn't talk about that either. I don't remember any kind of service. Maybe they thought I was too young to go. I don't know, but it was just, didn't talk about it. But then I think when I was busy raising my children. I was not thinking about death. Fortunately, I didn't have to at that time. But then when I went to nursing school, I started caring for people who were elderly and dying. And it kind of brought me face to face with, yes, we're going to die. We're going to die. And how do I feel about that? And what do I know about that? And I didn't know anything. And I just felt kind of afraid of this big unknown. So at that time, I just started paying more attention to death and just thinking about it, what it meant. And then I became a hospice volunteer, but that wasn't a good fit for me. It just didn't give me enough of what I was looking for. As a nurse, you get to have this intimate connection with people at a really hard time in their life, especially with children. And that's what kind of work I wanted to do, something that was more intimate. So I took Bodhi's training, which was wonderful. And when I left that training, I didn't know what I was going to do with all that. But then I ended up just kind of serendipitously being a volunteer with End of Life Washington. And that's just really gives me that intimacy and lets me share in people's lives in such a deep and a profound way that, and being a part of their death and their process of thinking about it is just so awesome and such an honor.
Really, yeah. I think we've talked, of course, many times about how it maybe is one of the more sacred moments in people's lives to be in their life during that time and with their community as well. So
So, Yana, you didn't have a foundation around talking about death. And now you are right in the middle of a lot of conversations. So tell us tell us more about your work and how it plays out on your day to day.
Okay, well, I will learn about someone who wants more information or is trying to do the process. I will either get a referral from the main office, End of Life Washington office. People can fill out a request for support online. I also will get requests from doctors. They will connect me with a patient who they've discussed that with. Sometimes the hospice nurses will let us know someone wants some help. So then I'll get that person's phone number. We call them clients. We don't call them patients because we're not medical people. So there are clients. So I will call them and set up a time to meet with them. It's really best to meet in person, and they always want to. So I go to their house and we just talk. We have a conversation. We talk about what they know about the process, where they're at in their illness and in their dying process, and just whatever they want to talk about. And then after we do that, then we get down to the nuts and bolts of the actual process of having to see two doctors, having to turn in a written form. The prescription gets sent to the pharmacy. I don't know how much detail you want about that, but I kind of walk them through that process. And then, maybe I'll stay in touch with them now and then. Oh, well, how did it go? I know you saw Dr. So-and-so. Did he sign off for you? Or so I'll call the pharmacy. Oh, did you get that prescription? So I kind of keep tabs on the process. And then once the prescription is at the pharmacy, depending on the person, for some people, they want those drugs right away. And for some people, they just want to know that prescription is there, ready for them to use if and when they want it. And that gives people so much comfort and so much sense of control. So whether they use it or not, it's there. And I think statistically, it's about maybe 2/3 of people who get a prescription fill it and use it, and the other third don't. So then I offer to attend their death, to be there. I can't really say how many people choose that, because there's a lot of people who do this process on their own without a volunteer helping them and do it themselves. But probably at least half the people I work with want me there. And I work with a partner, another volunteer here in Port Townsend. So if they want us to come, we'll come and just be a calm, experienced presence for them. I usually mix up the meds. People don't really want to do that themselves. And just guide them through doing this. And it's just, people are so brave. It just, you just sit back and watch this and watch these people doing this in their lives, making that choice for themselves, and having the people who love them support them in this. Maybe they don't support it 100%, but they are there for their person. And so once the person has taken the meds and has died, then I will usually wait, well, not always, until we'll call hospice, let them know. We advise people to be on hospice, and they usually are. So we kind of help with that closing process, calling hospice, calling the funeral home. Sometimes we'll wait, and then sometimes we'll just go if they're all okay. Kind of judge how people are doing, how long they stay.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I know from my own research is that this is not that. I mean, there are probably people on our call who aren't from the state of Washington. And so I believe there are half a dozen states or maybe a little more now, in the country that have some form of death with dignity or physician-assisted dying. And the rules are different in every state. And so I think our rules just changed or are going to change. They just passed some new legislation in the state of Washington that changed the rules. So you need one doctor and one medical person. It doesn't have to be a doctor to sign off on it. And so some of the rules change. And I think the point of this is for anyone who's thinking about this to do the research in their own state, in their own area, and find out what's available, and find somebody like Yana who can help you know what's going on and help you with it. And as you mentioned in your bio at the beginning when we were talking, there are other options. And I know hospice can help you with palliative care or other options, the voluntarily stopping eating and drinking that will accomplish the same thing, possibly less comfortably. But yeah, so I wonder if you wanted to talk about any of that. Do you know any more about any other states or any other options?
Well, I think there's about 10 states now that medical aid in dying is legal. VSED, which is the voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, is never illegal. It is a person's choice to do this, and there are no laws governing that. One thing, I don't know if this has anything to do with this question, but it used to be called medical aid, or it used to be called death with dignity. That's how it kind of started. The thought being that people look at death, their own death, and think, oh, I don't want to be writhing in pain. I want to feel like I have some dignity as I'm going through this process.
Yeah.
And the truth is, you can have a dignified death, however you choose. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to read something about that. It's written by Stephen Jameson. I don't know if you know him. He wrote a book called Final Acts of Love, Families, Friends, and Assisted Dying.
Great.
And what he wrote, he says, the idea of a good death is not owned by any one approach or institution. It doesn't only occur within hospital settings or with availability of hospice care. The idea of good is affected by the nature of the experience, wherever it occurs, and whatever model of dying is finally selected. It evolves out of the experience itself by the opportunities that are taken by all participants. In this way, an attitude of awe and sacredness towards death doesn't necessarily depend on how or where one dies, as much as on who one is and what one carries into the experience. Although death can be managed in better ways, if we desire that a sense of awe, respect, and sacredness be present, these must be brought to the experience by the participants themselves.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we'll put a link to the book in the podcast.
Okay. Yeah, I looked up his book, and he wrote it in 1995.
Wow.
He was, I think he was involved with the Hemlock Society. So that's all I know. He was a thanatologist, and he wrote this book and did research on dying. So.
Yeah, I've read some other things by him. So, thank you. That's a great example, great quote.
So actually, where I was kind of going with that was death with dignity is now called medical aid in dying. That's really a better phrase for it. So we call it MAID, M-A-I-D.
Great. Yeah.
Medical aid in dying. Because, like we just heard, you can die in a beautiful way without taking medication or, so that's a real misnomer. And so medical aid in dying, MAID.
I love that.
Great. Thank you. That's important.
It is. I just have a question about when you are supporting the client, Do you also help support the family or friends who are witnessing or just supporting your clients? Like how are they resourced during this whole process?
Well, at least let's say the closest family members and friends are present during the initial conversations. So I'm able to answer their questions. I make myself available by phone or email if anything comes up for them. And then on the day of ingestion, we call it, it's something we're all doing together. And I think the best support for them is education of the process. It's like, okay, now the person is going to take these pre-meds. There's a couple pre-meds that are taken to settle the person's stomach. So we explain about that, and we explain the time frames, and it's just preparing them to know what is going to happen and the possibilities of what could happen. But I think knowledge can bring people comfort and peace, and so I think that's the main way. And then staying out of their way. This is their sacred time. And so it's something I really have to be sensitive to, is how much to get involved and how much to withhold and stay back.
Well, I'm glad you said that education can bring comfort and peace, Yana, because that's what Wakil and why we started this podcast, because we do want to normalize these conversations around death and dying in all of its many facets, right? So thank you for doing that heavy work too.
Thank you.
It's important. Yeah.
It is.
It's a privilege. It really is.
So what are your biggest challenges with this work?
I thought about that question. My biggest challenge, I have a lot of support in this. My partner supports what I do. I have a really good mentor with End of Life Washington. And so she's always right there for me. And so I feel really supported that way. I think a challenge for me is and this may sound strange because I do this a lot, I don't want it to become rote for me. I want to be present with each person in the way they deserve. And that just blesses everybody,
Yeah.
So I think just, taking the time to center myself and go to this person and not have preconceived ideas or like, oh, well, I'm meeting this person now and then I have to meet somebody else in a half an hour. And, just so that's kind of a challenge. And I don't know, to me, it sounds kind of funny. It's like, it's such an awesome thing. And yet when you do something a lot, it can become kind of taken for granted. And I don't do that ever.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. That's so thoughtful of you to think, to hold it in that way. That's such a compassionate way to think about it and hold it. It's a beautiful, unique, new experience every single time.
Every time.
Yeah. Thank you. That's beautiful. So what do you need in your life to be supported? You said you have a spouse or a partner that supports you. You have a mentor. What are other things you do to support yourself, like to resource yourself?
I'm being more committed to my own spiritual practice. I try to manage my life and my schedule so that I can be mindful and present when I need to talk to people. Yeah, I don't know. That's about all I have to say.
Yeah, that's foundational for a lot of folks who do this work. It's the spiritual practices that keep us connected.
Yeah, I think one of my friends who actually interviewed, our very first interview, was Aya Shakur. And I remember asking him when I first met him, how do you get yourself ready for each new conversation? Because he was a hospice chaplain. And he said, well, I take I always stop before I go, even if it's just for a few minutes, between people, and just take time to, if possible, be in the forest, if possible, at least be with a tree or by some water or something, and just take some breaths and give myself the permission to be fully present in that space with nature, if possible, or at least with my own breath. And so I think, as we're saying, that spiritual practice, that reconnection, or that noticing our connectedness, is a great example of how, I think, what you're talking about, just having that practice of being centered before you begin another time with people, because it's so important. Such a grace to be in that space, to put yourself in that place of connectedness and go into each new situation with that connection.
Well, I'd like to share a story, unless you have a really burning question to ask me.
Go ahead, please.
Share your story.
Well, this is the story, and it's a true story about a friend of mine. Her name was Abby, and she had cancer. She went through treatment for over a year, kind of had mixed results with her treatment. And finally, she couldn't get any more treatments and she was dying. And she had gone through the medical aid in dying process, got all her paperwork in order, had her prescription waiting. But she was just waiting to see if she would want to make that choice or not. But towards the end, she was suffering. And she said, "No, I'm ready. I want to take these drugs." And so she picked a day. And what she chose to do in the morning before she took the medications was, she was a person who loved dogs, and she didn't have a dog of her own, but she befriended dogs all over town. She knew all these dogs. She knew their names, their favorite cookies. And so she wanted to have a dog parade. She invited her favorite dogs to come walk one by one past her bedroom window so she could see them. And I took my dog, and she was so happy. I mean, here she was, so close to death. And she was radiant. I mean, and seeing her dogs that she loved. So then the dogs went home, and then she invited about 6 of us to be there. And before she took the meds, we just sat on her bed and talked together. And then we kind of one by one spent some time with her. And she took the meds and died very quickly. And we just all sat there, we sang, and this is just such a beautiful example of how beautiful this process can be. So by the time she died, it was kind of the end of the day, and we hadn't called the funeral home yet. We were still just waiting, being with her. And someone had brought some soup, and so we put together a dinner. And so we were all sitting at the table eating, and there was Abby in her bed next to the table, and it just felt so normal and so natural that we were still all there together. And then the funeral home came, and she ended up having a beautiful green burial. But it was just so perfect. It just felt so good. But again, it doesn't have to be that way to be a good death.
Yeah. But thank you for sharing that, because I think more of our community should know that is a choice, right? In this culture, we whisk everything away quickly and we sanitize. And yet the beginning of this journey for us who are left behind is exactly like what you did, right? Have a bowl of soup and still have your friend nearby. It makes me so happy.
Yeah. Very, very beautiful story. Thank you. That's such a great sharing. Appreciated it.
She orchestrated it all, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it too, right? It's that we have that opportunity if we take it. Yeah.
So, are you afraid of the end of life, Yana?
Oh, I could say I'm not afraid of death. I don't have a terminal diagnosis, so it's kind of removed from me. but I feel like I don't fear it. I feel like I have enough confidence in the medical world to be able to keep me comfortable. So I'm not really afraid of pain or suffering or not being able to breathe. I feel like those things are managed medically, usually pretty well. I think for me, thinking about dying is letting go of my family.
Mm.
Mm.
And that's, even now, it brings tears
Mm-hmm.
to me because I want to be there with them. And so I think the fear in that is that when I am dying, I want to have the grace to not fall apart for them.
Mm.
And I know that's part of it, is doing that, but yet I want to, I don't know, I just want to shine with love and not with sadness and emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's my fear.
Mm-hmm.
But I also trust that when the time comes, it will probably be okay.
Right. Yana, I just want to say I bear witness to the longing that you have to stay with your family. And I also hold that, yeah, you radiate life and love, and it'll be a blessing for your family as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we may all fall apart. In fact, we definitely will, one way or the
Yeah.
other, right?
Well, I know in other shows you've talked about you're a crier, and I'm a crier, as you can see.
I love it.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and it's okay, actually. It's okay.
Yeah. Crying's a good thing.
And it's okay to have that longing too. I think that
Yeah.
I actually have never heard anybody say that. And so usually when I've been in hospice situations, they've always been, well, they're terminal. They have a terminal illness. And so they worry about like physically being in pain in front of family. But, I hope somebody listening out there has that similar yearning that you do. And it's okay. It's all part of our humanness and our human journey. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. 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 And thanks for your tears. Those are always a blessing. Always a blessing. Well, we're getting close to the end. Is there any questions or anything that you wish we'd have asked you, or any other stories that you'd like to share with us?
I don't have another story. I have kind of a question that I think about and some of my clients talk to me about. And that is, if you go the route of medical aid in dying, how does that affect your experience of death?
Mm.
I'm thinking, like Catherine Dowling Singh writes about, the nearing death experience and how you can reach the highest levels of consciousness at that time. And if you're so deeply medicated, how does that work together? That's my question I'm thinking about. And like I said, some of my clients are concerned about, like, well, I don't know if I want to take those drugs because I want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to experience it. And so I don't know. I'm curious if Bodhi talked about that in the presentation he gave.
Not really. I mean, he may have in his class that he gave us. He didn't talk about it with us. And I know, in my work with hospice, there was always that trade-off of wanting not to be in pain, but also wanting to be conscious, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and so there was always this trade-off that people were balancing of having enough meds that they wouldn't be in pain, but also not being so out of it that they weren't even present for the last part of their life. So it's a really good question and one to consider. What has been your experience with that? It sounds like the actual medication for dying is a fairly quick process. So there's not like a lingering, or maybe there is, but I guess it's a question I should ask. Is there a time of checking out that people don't get a chance to be present?
Well, when they take the drugs, they will fall into a deep coma within probably about 5 minutes. So there is that time when, they're going somewhere. And then it can take, the average time to death is a couple hours, but who knows what's going on
Yeah.
You know, it's such a mystery in so many ways.
It is.
So, yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good question, a good thing to think about. I don't have a good answer, but then that's why it's a mystery. So something for all of our readers and our listeners and our friends to ponder, and maybe they can write back to us and tell us their thoughts. And
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Definitely.
This has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you. Appreciate the work you're doing and your presence and who you are and what you bring to this work, and in general, just your life and your 5 kids. I'd love to meet them sometime.
Yes, thank you, Yana. I appreciate it. Okay.
We usually end with a poem at the end, and so this week's poem is an excerpt from Song of Myself by Walt Whitman. So I'll start. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers, and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? And what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and ceased the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier.
Oh, Walt. So aware, so prescient of what we know now. Like nothing ever really goes away, you know?
Yeah, that was an 1892 version of the Song of Myself. So beautiful, beautiful.
So beautiful.
Well said. Do you want to read
I
it again?
will. So everybody just take a minute and let's go through it again. I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women, and the hints about old men and mothers, and the offspring taking soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? And what do you think has become of the women and children? They are alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there really is no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it, and seized the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Thank you, Mr. Walt Whitman.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us, especially Yana. Thank you so much. And we will have another episode coming in a couple of weeks. In fact, in that episode, we will be meeting Jane Ellen Nickel, who is a retired chaplain from Allegheny College. She lives in Medville, Pennsylvania now with 2 feline companions, but she is talking to us about how it was as a college chaplain, where she said death is a relatively rare occurrence, but when it happens, it's often unexpected and involves losing someone at a young age. Also, of course, the job involves counseling students and faculty and people who have lost family members. So we'll hear some really poignant stories from Jane Ellen Nickel in our next episode.
Yes, and we want to hear from all of you, listeners, who might have some great stories or poignant experiences that you would like to share with us. So you're welcome to email us at endoflifeconvo@gmail.com. That it's endoflifeconvo@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yay! Thank you, Yana.
Thank you, Yana. See you later.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on the End of Life Conversations. We appreciate you and look forward to sharing our stories. Thanks to my daughter Lucero and Nico Rush, who have cheerfully assisted us as our editors and tech support. Additional resources, transcript of this episode, and links to our social media will be in the podcast notes.
Yeah, thank you so much. And please subscribe, tell your friends, follow us on social media, and consider supporting us through Patreon. We want to acknowledge that the music we are using was composed and produced by Charles Heastand.